From New York, this is Democracy Now! One of the main witnesses in the extradition case against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has admitted he made false claims against Assange in exchange for immunity from prosecution. We'll speak to Assange's attorney, Jen Robinson. Then, former presidential candidate and Alaska Senator Mike Gravel has died at the age of 91. He was fiercely opposed to the Vietnam War and draft and played a seminal role in the release of the Pentagon Papers, spearheading a one-man push to read the document into the congressional record to get the papers into the public record.
I could maybe just hang on to the documents and never do anything about it and just sit by and let time go on.
Monsieur pulls back a little bit and he whispers down in my ear, he says, "Somebody wants to give you the Pentagon Papers." I said, "Man, where is he?" He says, "He's going to call us back." So, man, I get dressed up real quick. We bolt back to the office, and I'm sitting in my office waiting for this call. Along comes his voice. He says, "Senator, would you read the Pentagon Papers as part of your filibuster?" I says, "Yes."
We'll feature a speech by Mike Gravel laying out how he received the Pentagon Papers and why he pushed for their release. Then, legal author Adam Cohen on Supreme Court Justice Breyer's legacy-defining decision.
If he decides to retire, and he's 82 years old right now, President Biden will be able to fill his seat, and Biden has promised to appoint a black woman as his successor. If Breyer does not step down, there's a very real chance that a Republican president later will fill the seat, and the conservative majority on the court will rise from 6-3 to 7-2 and be able to do even more damage to workers, poor people, people of color, and other vulnerable groups in our society.
We'll also look at a major Supreme Court ruling against the United Farm Workers. We'll speak with Camila Chavez, Executive Director of the Dolores Huerta Foundation, the niece of Cesar Chavez. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Iraq's military has condemned U.S. airstrikes along the Iraq-Syria border as a breach of sovereignty. The Pentagon says President Biden ordered Monday morning's assault on weapons storage facilities in Syria and Iraq in response to drone attacks by an Iran-backed militia against U.S. troops and personnel in Iraq. It's the second time Biden has ordered airstrikes in the region. In a statement, the Coordinating Committee of the Iraqi Resistance promised to retaliate, adding, quote, "We will not remain silent over the continued presence of American occupation forces in Iraq, which goes against the Constitution, the Parliament's vote, and the will of the Iraqi people," they said. The U.S. airstrikes came less than 2 weeks after the U.S. House of Representatives voted to repeal the 2002 authorization for use of military force, which grants sweeping war powers to the president. Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 22.5 years in prison for the murder of George Floyd. He's expected to serve just 15 years of that sentence. His lawyers are also expected to appeal his April conviction. Lawyers for Floyd's family and Minnesota's Attorney General said that while the sentence does not serve justice, it provides some accountability for Floyd's murder. Floyd's family said the sentence was too light, but they're looking toward the federal civil rights indictment. This is his brother, Rodney Floyd.
This right here is this 22-year sentence they gave this man. It's a slap on the wrist. We serving a life sentence and not having them in our life.
In related news, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet is calling on states in North America, Europe, and Latin America to take steps to dismantle racism and to, quote, confront past legacies and deliver redress, unquote, as her agency released a report outlining the systemic nature of racism against people of African descent. The World Health Organization is urging even fully vaccinated people to continue wearing masks, maintain social distancing, and take other precautions as more outbreaks linked to the Delta variant spread around the world.
Delta is the most transmissible of the variants identified so far. Has been identified in at least 85 countries and is spreading rapidly among unvaccinated populations.
Israel's reimposed an indoor mask mandate and other measures amidst a new rise in cases. About half of those infected in a recent outbreak linked to the Delta variant were fully vaccinated. Meanwhile, India is reporting mounting cases of a related variant, which has been dubbed Delta Plus. In Bangladesh, tens of thousands of migrant workers left the capital Dhaka Sunday ahead of strict stay-at-home orders going into effect this week. In Australia, over 5 million people in and around Sydney have been ordered to stay home for the next 2 weeks after an outbreak of the Delta COVID-19 variant. Indonesia set a new daily record of over 21,000 cases Sunday. Authorities say the current surge has brought the health system close to collapse. In Russia, Moscow and St. Petersburg both set new records for daily death tolls this weekend. In South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced new restrictions to deal with its surge.
Along with many other countries on our continent, Africa, South Africa is seeing a massive resurgence of infections. A curfew will be in place from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. and all non-essential establishments will need to close by 8 p.m. The sale of alcohol, both for on-site and off-site consumption, is prohibited.
Here in the United States, coronavirus cases and daily deaths continue to drop. The daily death toll now averages around 300, nearly all of them among unvaccinated people. According to an Associated Press analysis, just 0.1% of COVID hospitalizations in the U.S. in May were due to breakthrough cases in vaccinated people. Unvaccinated people accounted for about 0.8% of COVID deaths. President Biden has promised to support Afghanistan's central government even after the U.S. completes its troop withdrawal by a September 11th deadline. Biden made the promise during talks at the White House Friday with Afghan President Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah, chair of Afghanistan's High Council for National Reconciliation. President Ghani said after the White House meeting he still hoped to engage the Taliban in dialogue.
Force is not the way to compel an Afghan to submission. We still call on them to have a ceasefire and to engage in a political process, because a political settlement is the ultimate mechanism of ending a war. As Lincoln said, the best way of treating an enemy is to turn him into a friend.
President Ghani's visit to Washington, D.C. came amidst a rapid advance by the Taliban into areas formerly held by the Afghan government, roughly doubling the territory under Taliban control in just the last 2 months. In Florida, the death toll has risen to 9 people, with over 150 still missing, following the collapse of a high-rise apartment building in Surfside last Thursday. A 2018 inspection found the building had abundant cracking and spalling in its foundation, with engineers pointing to design flaws and insufficient waterproofing. NPR is reporting a Surfside official nonetheless told residents 1 month after the inspection report that the building was in very good shape. Vice President Kamala Harris visited El Paso, Texas, Friday for her first trip to the U.S.-Mexico border since taking office. Harris toured a Customs and Border Protection facility and met with detained refugee children. Harris called for a depoliticization of immigration policies as advocates continue to condemn her statements earlier this month during her visit to Guatemala, telling asylum seekers, "Do not come to the United States." In labor news, more than 2,000 healthcare workers in Cook County, Illinois, are on strike demanding affordable health care and better pay, including temporary bonuses for frontline workers in situations made hazardous by the pandemic. Friday's strike by service employees, International Union Local 73, came a day after 1,200 Chicago area nurses held a one-day strike to demand safe staffing levels in Cook County hospitals and clinics. The Justice Department has filed a federal lawsuit against the state of Georgia for a sweeping voter suppression law, which the suit says discriminates against black voters. This is Kristen Clark, Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division.
These legislative actions occurred at a time when the Black population in Georgia continues to steadily increase, and after a historic election that saw record voter turnout across the state, particularly for absentee voting, which Black voters are now more likely to use than white voters.
The Georgia law, which passed in March, adds new voter ID requirements, shortens the window for absentee voting, severely limits ballot drop boxes, and grants the state power to intervene in elections in Democratic counties. Lawyers for the Trump Organization must present any final arguments on their client's behalf no later than today, according to a deadline set by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. The DA is expected to announce criminal charges as early as this week against former President Trump's business over its financial dealings involving top executive Alan Weisselberg. Meanwhile, a former executive vice president for the Trump Organization told CNN Trump, quote, deserves to go to jail. White House aides drafted a proclamation last June to invoke the Insurrection Act as then-President Trump considered deploying thousands of active-duty troops in Washington, D.C. to suppress the protests that followed the police killing of George Floyd. That's according to the New York Times, which reports Trump had to be talked out of the plan to invoke the Insurrection Act to call in the military. Millions of people took to the streets around the world this weekend to celebrate LGBTQ+ pride. In Turkey, police and riot gear came down on protesters, firing tear gas and blocking streets where marches were taking place. Thousands marched in Paris, Mexico City, Panama, and in El Salvador's capital, San Salvador, where there were also reports of police harassment during Pride celebrations. Here in New York City, two main events took place. New York City Pride held a mostly virtual ceremony for the second year in a row due to the pandemic. The event also banned New York police from participating this year after years of advocacy from Black and brown LGBTQ community members. This year also marked the third annual anti-corporate, anti-police queer liberation march.
This one is corporate-free, and this one was really about the roots of the movement. This is why we celebrate and also still remember to be active and fight for our rights that still need to be met.
There were reports of NYPD agents attacking and pepper-spraying revelers on Sunday night. In other news from New York, Johnson & Johnson has agreed to pay a settlement of up to $230 million over its role in fueling the opioid crisis. Attorney General Letitia James of New York announced that as part of the deal with New York, J&J will no longer manufacture or sell opioids in the U.S., and that the funds from the settlement will go towards prevention, treatment, and education efforts in New York. The settlement also allows J&J to escape a major opioid trial starting this week in Long Island, New York. And Mike Gravel, former Democratic U.S. Senator from Alaska and two-time presidential candidate who read the Pentagon Papers into the congressional record, has died at the age of 91. Gravel ran for the 2008 Democratic presidential nomination as a vocal critic of the U.S. invasion of Iraq. During a 2007 presidential debate, Gravel confronted then-candidate Barack Obama about using nuclear weapons. He switched from running as a Democratic candidate to a Libertarian one after opposing the military-industrial complex and imperialism that he said permeates the Democratic Party. Later in the show, we'll air excerpts of Mike Gravel reading the Pentagon Papers in 1971 and speaking about events leading up to the historic reading. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We turn now to a major development in the case of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who the U.S. State Department is pushing to extradite from Britain. Assange faces up to 175 years in prison if brought to the United States, where he's been indicted for violations of the Espionage Act related to the publication of classified documents, which many say expose U.S. war crimes. Now, one of the main witnesses in that extradition case has come forward to admit he made false claims against Assange for exchange in immunity from prosecution. The revelation came in an interview with the convicted Icelandic hacker, Siggi Þórðarson, for a detailed article published by the Icelandic biweekly Stundin. It suggests the U.S. Justice Department collaborated with Þórðarson to generate the indictment for Assange that was submitted to the British courts. U.S. prosecutors issued a new superseding indictment against Assange in June 2020 that refers to Þórðarson as a teenager and Iceland as NATO country 1, and says Assange encouraged him to, among other things, quote, commit computer intrusion and steal audio recordings of phone conversations between Icelandic officials. The Stundin article cites previously unpublished documents and chat logs showing how Þórðarson falsely presented himself as a prominent WikiLeaks representative. Stundin reports that, in fact, quote, all indications are that Þórðarson was acting alone without any authorization, let alone urging from anyone inside WikiLeaks, unquote. For more, we're joined by Jennifer Robinson, human rights attorney who's been advising Julian Assange and WikiLeaks since 2010. She, like Julian Assange, is an Australian citizen. She joins us from Western Australia. Jen, welcome back to Democracy Now! Can you lay out the significance of this latest revelation and what it should mean, you feel, for Julian Assange?
This is just the latest revelation of how problematic the United States case is against Julian Assange, and in fact baseless. Of course, as you outlined at the introduction, the evidence from Þórðarson that was given to the United States and formed the basis of the second superseding indictment, including allegations of hacking, has now been, on his own admission, demonstrated to have been fabricated. Not only did he misrepresent his access to Julian Assange and to WikiLeaks and his association with Julian Assange, he has now admitted that he made up and falsely misrepresented to the United States that there was any association with WikiLeaks and any association with hacking. So this is just the latest revelation to demonstrate why the US case should be dropped. We have to begin, of course, with the free speech implications. Free speech groups, the Washington Post, the New York Times, mainstream media are unanimously against and have denounced this prosecution as a threat to freedom of speech in the United States. But leaving that aside, the factual basis for this case has completely fallen apart. And we have been calling for this case to be dropped for a very long time. And this is just the latest form of abuse demonstrated in this case that shows why it ought to be dropped.
Jen Robinson, why do you believe Þórðarson came forward now? He not only granted this exclusive interview to the Icelandic paper Stundin, but he also turned over never published before chat logs and new documents of his time as a WikiLeaks volunteer, and talk about his actual prominence within the organization or lack of it.
I can only speculate as to why he would choose to come forward now. But of course, as you know, in January, we won the extradition fight. The judge decided to refuse Julian Assange's extradition to the United States, unfortunately not on free speech grounds, but on humanitarian grounds associated with his mental health and the oppressive prison conditions that he would face if returned to the United States. The United States, under the Trump administration, sought to appeal that decision, and we are still awaiting a decision from the British court as to whether permission to appeal will be granted. Pending that decision, Julian remains in prison in the United States. So this is just another indication. We have been calling for this case to be dropped. We have been asking the Biden administration to drop the appeal and allow Julian to return home to his family. And I think this latest revelation will only contribute to that appeal to the Biden administration to put an end to this case. So perhaps he was motivated on those grounds, but it's hard to say.
And then can you talk about Icelandic officials who are now apparently speaking out and saying that the U.S. government is, quote, trying to use things here in Iceland and use people in our country to spin a cobweb that would catch Julian Assange. The article also reports U.S. government essentially deceived Icelandic officials.
Again, this is demonstrating the significant and problematic abuse that we've seen throughout this case. Not only are we looking at problematic evidence gathering within Iceland, which Icelandic officials have questioned the legality of, let's look at the other forms of abuse we've seen in this case. As we put in the extradition hearing, we now know that Julian has been unlawfully spied upon, his doctor's meetings unlawfully spied upon, us as his legal team unlawfully spied upon. He's had legally privileged materials seized by the United States government. As Daniel Ellsberg said in his evidence before the extradition court in the UK, this kind of abusive conduct by the United States was sufficient back during the Nixon administration to have the entire case against Daniel Ellsberg thrown out for an abusive process. But in 2021, we are seeing unlawful spying, seizure of legally privileged material, and now a source which admits that he fabricated evidence and lied to the FBI and to the United States about the evidence upon which this indictment is based. This should be more than enough for the United States and for the Biden administration to put this case to rest. It has gone on far too long.
You also have this situation where Siggy Thordarson has been convicted of sexual abuse of minors and other crimes, including financial fraud. In the interview, he admitted to continuing his crime spree while working with the DOJ and the FBI. What's crucial to understand about his involvement with the U.S. government in trying to get Julian Assange extradited here, where he faces 175 years in prison?
Well, I do think it's significant that the initial indictment for Julian Assange related only to the publications back in 2010, 2011, the Chelsea Manning publications. It was the second superseding indictment introduced by the Trump administration, which was based upon Thordarson's evidence. Now, any lawyer and even any layperson would be looking at evidence from a convicted felon who had been convicted of forgery, fraud, and sexual abuse allegations associated with minors. That is a problematic source. Now we have him admitting that he lied to the FBI about that evidence. This raises serious concerns about the integrity of this investigation and the integrity of this criminal prosecution, and serious questions ought to be being asked within the Department of Justice about this prosecution and the fact that it is continuing at all.
So what are you demanding right now, Jen Robinson?
We have been asking for a very long time for the Biden administration and the Department of Justice to put an end to this case on principled free speech grounds and on due process grounds. And this is just the latest evidence to show why this case needs to be dropped.
Jen Robinson, I want to thank you for being with us, human rights attorney who's been advising Julian Assange and WikiLeaks since 2010, speaking to us from Australia. Next up, we remember former presidential candidate and Alaska Senator Mike Gravel. He's died at the age of 91. He was seminal in releasing the Pentagon Papers to the public. Stay with us.
Sound from the pavement. Has the moon lost her memory? She is smiling alone. In the lamplight, the withered leaves collect at my feet, and the wind begins to mourn.
That's Memory by Barbra Streisand. Streisand held a 1973 fundraiser for Dan Ellsberg with Yoko Ono, the Beatles, John Lennon, Ringo Starr, and George Harrison. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Mike Gravel, the former presidential candidate and Democratic U.S. Senator from Alaska, died this weekend at the age of 91. In the 70s, he was fiercely opposed to the Vietnam Vietnam War and the draft. He played a seminal role in the release of the Pentagon Papers. That's the 7,000 pages of top-secret documents outlining the secret history of the U.S. war in Vietnam. The leak would end up helping take down President Nixon, help end the Vietnam War, and lead to a major victory for press freedom. While the papers were leaked to the New York Times and the Washington Post by Dan Ellsberg, Gravel spearheaded a one-man push to get the pages of the Pentagon Papers into the congressional record so that it would become public record, then anyone could read them and publish them. Beacon Press went on to do just that, publishing a 7-volume set of the Pentagon Papers. Tomorrow, June 29th, is the 50th anniversary of the day in 1971 when Gravel read the Pentagon Papers into the record. He cried within seconds and could not continue. But when he came out of the session, someone told him that since he'd started reading them, he could have the rest automatically put into the record. In 2007, I moderated a panel with Senator Mike Gravel and Dan Ellsberg and the head of the Beacon Press, Robert West, talking about how the Pentagon Papers were made public. But here we're going to 1971, where Mike Gravel attempted to read the documents into the record.
I know of nothing in our history to equal it for extent of failure and extent of loss in all aspects of the term. We can people, human beings, are being killed as I speak to you tonight, killed as a direct result of policy decisions we as a body have made. Arms are being severed. Metal is crashing through human bodies because of a public policy. This government, one may respond that we made such a sacrifice to preserve freedom and liberty in Southeast Asia. One may respond that we sacrifice ourselves on the continent of Asia so that we will not have to fight a similar war on the shores of America. One can make these arguments only if he has failed to read the Pentagon Papers. That is the terrible truth of it all.
In the midst of him speaking, he broke down crying. Yes, that's Democratic Senator Mike Gravel attempting to read the Pentagon Papers into the record, the congressional record, 50 years ago. He died this weekend at the age of 91. In 2007, in Portland, Oregon, I moderated an event at the annual conference of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Portland, Oregon, commemorating the publication of the Pentagon Papers by the Beacon Press, their publishing house. One of the main speakers was Alaska Senator Mike Gravel. Today we bring you his extended remarks as he laid out how he received the Pentagon Papers from Washington Post journalist Ben Bagdikian, who in turn had gotten them from Pentagon Papers whistleblower Dan Ellsberg.
Let me just pick up where he left off, because it really, there's a lot of little vignettes, and I'll talk fast, but I want to get all the details out, because I know what you want to know is the inside skinny. You can read the broad lines, but it's what happened to both our lives at the time that Dan calls my office. He talks to Joe Rothstein, who was my administrative assistant. My administrative assistant, I was down in the Senate gym getting a massage. I was on a table. And of course, you can't have staff come into the Senate. This is hallowed ground. So, into the Senate gym. So he's knocking at the door. He says, I've got to see the senator. It's an emergency. And he works his way in to get into the massage stall. And the masseur pulls back a little bit, and he whispers down in my ear. He says, somebody wants to give you the Pentagon Papers. I said, man, where is he? He says, he's going to call us back. So, man, I get dressed up real quick. We bolt back to the office, and I'm sitting in my office waiting for this call. Along comes his voice. He says, Senator, would you read the Pentagon Papers as part of your filibuster? I says, yes. Now, please hang up. The reason for that is I have a background in intelligence. When I was 23 years old, I was a top secret control officer. I could classify and I could declassify, and I was 23 years old. So now here are the papers coming at me. I had a sense of what they were was a history. And of course I had read what the Times had published, and so lo and behold, Dan and I have other conversations. To tell you the truth, our memories are a little vague. He informed me about something that I didn't know, and occasionally I'd done that with him when he was doing his memoir, Secrets. We spent there a couple of days. Oh, is that your interpretation of what you think we did? Yes. Well, no, that's my, oh, no, we did it that way. And what happens, that's human beings. We all have a different read on some of the details. The long and short of it is, he called me in a few days, and he was angry. He's on the phone. He says, why the hell haven't you used the papers? And I says, why the hell haven't you got them to me? I don't have them. I haven't heard anything. So he goes back to Ben Begdickian, and Ben then contacts my office. Well, quite candidly, I didn't know who Ben was, but he wanted to get to meet with me. So we meet somewhat secretively on the front steps of the Capitol behind a column in broad daylight during the session. So Ben is standing there. We're talking about how we're going to move the papers across, and then out comes Bob Dole, who's one of my enemies, but we're on the same committee, and he walks up, and Begdickian is slipping behind a column, so he can't be seen. So I get rid of Dole fairly fast, and so we go back, and Begdickian had this plan. We're going to meet someplace out in the country, you know, Rock Creek Park in the dark. Hey, wait a second, Ben. I got to tell you, I got a little more experience in this than you have. What we're going to do, here's how we're going to transfer the papers. You're going to come at 12 o'clock at night under the marquee of the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. At 12 o'clock, you park your car there. I will come up with my car. You open your trunk. I will open my trunk, and I'll pop the papers in, and I'll race off. That's the way we'll do it before God and country, and they won't even know what happened. Well, what happens? A group of Alaska natives walk by. Oh, there's our senator. And they all want to come up and talk with me. And I'm trying to peel them away. Well, I've got to run. I've got to run. And so I got in my car. We did that. We transferred the papers. I sped away, parked my car, came back in, and Ben and I had a coffee. I took the papers home. Where are you going to put them? I brought them home. That's the first time I told my wife at the time, Rita, I says, I got the Pentagon Papers right here. And of course, the whole world was looking, trying to chase him down and catch him and get the papers. And he said, what are you going to do with them? We're going to put them under the bed and we're going to sleep on them. That's what we're going to do. We did. Next morning, I'm dyslexic, and so I couldn't read all those papers if it took me a year. And so what happened, I started calling staff in, and I said, look, you're going to come in, you bring a toilet kit, don't tell your wife what you're doing, you're just coming to the senator's house, and I met him at the door, and I said, look, I've got the Pentagon Papers. You come in, you can't leave until I leave. But I won't think ill of you if you don't come in, because there's risk that we don't know anything about. And so everyone to the person said, hey, Senator, let me have it. So about 4 or 5 people for 2 days were sleeping on the living room floor, and we would go through the papers. The style that I used in going through it, I was reading my little portion of it, the first part of it, which is the most historic and most interesting part. But the others I said, whenever you come across a name, come and show me the name. I would then read around the context and make a judgment, is that this should be excised or not. And when we exercised, we didn't just take a pencil, we took scissors and cut it out, so there'd be no misunderstandings. Now, I've got to bring the papers from my home to the Capitol. And so I buy 2 flight bags. You know those old flight bags without wheels? I buy 2 of those to honor the papers. And so I spend the money, pack them up with 2 bags like that, and so I'm going to take them to the Capitol. But now I'm concerned. So I call the Vietnam Veterans of America, and I say, look, I've got a problem. I need somebody to guard my office. And what I want the most disabled veterans you can find. Well, And lo and behold, I trudge in, and I wouldn't let my staff touch the paper. So I trudge in with my 2 big bags, heavy, and of course staff is walking with me, and the cops there looking, why the hell's the senator carrying the bags and the staff is not carrying his bags? So we walk down to the end of the hall, and there are about 6, 7 soldiers in uniform, you know it, ponytails, badges all over, all in wheelchairs. And they could do wheelies, and all they could do, they didn't know what I had. All they said, go get him, Senator, go get him. I'm just about to cry with the commitment of these human beings, and they guarded the office. No, but they were throwing their bodies at anybody that tried to break in. I had the papers. I go to the floor of the Senate. Now, I had made a deal with Alan Cran. I wanted to read in the filibuster. Now, I had a little bit of ego trip going on here. I wanted to break Strom Thurmond's record in filibustering. So, and the draft was going to expire at the end of the month. So I wanted to get 2 days, about almost close to 48 hours, and break his record. Now, how are you going to do that? Most people don't know when Huey Long and those guys used to debate. What they do is they're drinking a lot of water, they pee right on the floor, right on the Senate floor. They make no mistake about it. But I'm a little more cultured than that. And so what I do is I rig myself up. I go to the doctor's office. I tell him what's going on, tell him when I got filibuster. And so he rigs me up with a colostomy bag with a little hose down to my ankle. And my administrative assistant's job is going to bleed the colostomy bag. Then it gets better than that. We now go to, I got to get somebody in the chair, because you can't control the floor if you don't control the chair. So I go to Alan Cranston, my closest friend. I say, Alan, I need help. Well, what do you need, Mike? I got the Pentagon Papers. Oh my God, Mike, you need more than help. You got problems. So he says, I said, Alan, you don't have to do anything to risk. You don't have to touch the papers. You just get in the chair. By 5 o'clock, we'll turn around, and you just stay in that chair as long as I'm filibustering. And that was our plan. And so I said, now go down to the doctor's office and get a colostomy bag. He does that, and of course, I had a rubber mat. It was very interesting to go into the dynamics of that. So lo and behold, I come to the floor of the Senate. I'm trudging in with these papers. I put them next to my desk, and I was a freshman, so I was way on the side. And so Muskie had come up to me for some committee. We were on the same committee. He's talking to me. He looks down at these 2 black bags. He says, Mike, are those the Pentagon Papers? And I look up at him with a blank stare. It was just a joke on his part, but I'm looking at him, my God. So lo and behold, I'm a nice guy, so what I want to do, I know I'm going to be talking for a couple days, so I want to tell the staff of the Senate that, hey, you better call your wife because you're not getting out here shortly. And so what I do is I lay on a quorum call. Now, if you're familiar with the procedures in the Senate, a quorum call, they have to now start calling the roll. And there was only one other senator in the chamber. That was Griffin. The Democrats had gone to a banquet. The Republicans had gone home. And so there's two senators in the chamber. So I lay on a quorum call. Griffin walks up to me, and he says, Mike, what are you going to do? I says, I'm just continuing my filibuster on the draft. But I had always done that because Mansfield had set up a 2-track. Mind you, I filibustered for 5 months. It could only happen because Mansfield set it up without anybody seeing his velvet hand. And so I says, well, he says, but wait, what are you doing at night? I said, well, the draft's about to expire, and I just want to really make a big show. He goes back to his desk, and he's thinking. Then, of course, I wait 30 minutes to let the staff notify that they're going to be there a good part of the evening, and lo and behold, I make a unanimous consent to remove the quorum call. He objects. The minute he did that, I knew I had just been harpooned, and all I could think is in my mind, good men don't win. Good men don't win. I was so angry. He came up to me, and he says, well, Mike, what are you doing? And I started swearing at him, you cannot believe. Well, by that time, he knew something was really afoot. So he went to the Republican cloakroom and said, stay away from the Senate, telling all the Republicans, I'm sending my troops to go out there and get the Democrats to come back from the banquet. Well, that goes on for till about 9:30, 10 o'clock, and we could not get a quorum. I'm stuck. Rosti comes up to me and he says, Senator, we're stuck. There's nothing we can do here. So I grabbed it, and he says, but our attorneys think they got a plan B. So we grabbed the bags, trudged back to the office again. By this time, the Vietnam vets are out there. They know there's something really serious afoot because there's a lot of media following us. And so I go in and sit down, what's our plan? Well, Senator, it's interesting. There's not much hope, but we do have one precedent that we could follow. And that's the precedent, believe it or not, the House Un-American Activities Committee, for those of you who know what that means. He says what they were doing is they would go around the country and they would immediately call a hearing so that they could grab somebody, pull them up, swear them in, and get them to talk. He says, with that precedent, what you could do, and now mind you, I'm a freshman, you're chairman of a committee, a subcommittee. And of course, that committee was the Buildings and Grounds Committee. So lo and behold, they say, what you could do is you could convene a hearing of this committee, and you'd be still within the umbrage of the Senate. And so I said, fine, let's do that. But what we've got to do is we've got to have somebody testify. So we type up the notice that I'm chairman, I'm calling a hearing, slip it under the doors of all these senators who are not there, that I'm notifying them of the hearing, so that that's covered legally. And then the peace group calls up a Congressman Dow from Upper New York. He doesn't know what it's about. All they tell him on the telephone, Senator Gravel needs you to come and testify at a very important hearing. He gets dressed, he was an elderly fellow, gets dressed, comes down, and we convene. By this time, we're upstairs in one of the Senate chambers, committee room, and the whole phalanx of the media, and then Congressman Dodd comes up, and I'm sitting there with my 2 black bags, and my staff assistant, and the congressman, and I gavelled the meeting to order. Congressman, can I help you? Now, I understand you want to testify. He says, yes, I'd like to get a federal building in my district. And I say, Congressman, let me interrupt you right there. I know you need a federal building in your district, and I'd love to give you a federal building in your district. But I got to tell you, our government's broke. We don't have any money to give you a federal building. And let me tell you why we're broke. Because we're squandering all this money in Southeast Asia. And let me tell you how we got into Southeast Asia. And I haul out the papers, put them on the table, and I'm reading. Okay. It gets better than that. I read for an hour. Now, here again, I'm dyslexic. There's no way on God's green earth I'm going to read it, but I'm reading it. Now, keep in mind, I hadn't slept for about 3 or 4 days, and so I'm reading, and I break out sobbing. It's about 12 o'clock at night, and I am sobbing, and I can't get control of myself. Here's what was going through my head. A journalist, one of the networks next morning, oh, this was a bizarre occurrence the night before. You know, Gravel was very bizarre. He cried. And so what I was sobbing over, I had been to Walter Reed a month or more before to walk around, and I couldn't take it. I couldn't take it emotionally to look at the wounded. And so I can handle macro problems, but not micro. And so lo and behold, I kept saying to myself, my God, I love my country. My country is committing immoral acts. We're killing human beings. There's no reason for it. And I'm sobbing. And of course, as a dyslexic, I'm reading rote. You know, I can follow the words in front of me. So Rothstein comes up to me. He says, in the understatement here, he says, Senator, I think you've lost it. And I'll keep sobbing. And he says, and then he goes back, and I try to get a hold of myself, and I can't. And so he comes back. He says, Senator, why don't you put it in the record? And then I sobered up immediately and said, oh, yes, I got power. I'm the chairman of this committee. So I move and ask unanimous consent to put all these papers that I was going to read at the record, to put them in the record automatically. Bang, they're in the record. That's how it officially got into the record of the United States of America. And obviously the media, by that point, they're out there going, really? So I put the papers back in. We're trudging back to my office. The media is following us. We want the papers. We want the papers. So we cut a deal with them. Look, we got to copy the papers because we want to hang on to a set. And as we copy them, we'll turn them to you. You set up a pool, and then you go copy them and distribute them to the world. That's what happened all night long. And that's what made the Supreme Court decision moot, which was at 11 or 12 o'clock that very day. And what they did is they said you could not put on prior restraint. What you could do is if you published, you'd be at risk. And that's what happened. Those that had published took the risks, but they weren't prepared to take the risks after that. We scoured the country, and this is where the meeting comes in with Beacon. We scoured the country, could not find one major or minor or anybody that would touch the Pentagon Papers. We had some inkling that maybe MIT Press would. So with with my staff, Fishman and the one other attorney, we go to Boston. Whoever was handling it, and I don't recall at the time, he said, "Senator, I got bad news for you. MIT Press won't touch it with a 10-foot pole." And then I'm just crestfallen, like we're going to check how to get back to Washington. He said, "But I got some good news for you. Beacon Press has got the money, and they will publish it." And Gobin Stair and Bob West are downtown in Boston waiting for you if you want to come down and make the deal with them. And I said, "Let's go." And we had a press conference shortly thereafter, and that's when we announced that we were going to do it. I was a Unitarian even before all this happened in Alaska, but I can't tell you what I feel for the Beacon Press, for the Unitarians, and for Dan Ellsberg. Dan quoted and likes to say that when I went into service, I was going in to be a spy, but I wasn't getting any action, so I went in to be a combat infantry platoon leader. And on the patch on my shoulder said, "Follow me." Well, when I saw Dan do what he did, all I could think of, here's a guy that's walking up the hill, taking his life in his own hands, and the least I could do is follow Dan Ellsberg.
That's former Alaska Senator and two-time presidential candidate Mike Gravel describing in 2007 how he got the thousands of pages of the Pentagon Papers into the congressional record, which allowed them to be made public. Mike Gravel died this weekend at the age of 91. To see the whole event I moderated before the Unitarian Universalist Association's General Assembly with Senator Gravel, Dan Ellsberg, and Robert West, publisher of Beacon Press, go to DemocracyNow.org. Coming up, legal scholar Adam Cohen on Supreme Court Justice Breyer's legacy-defining decision. Stay with us. Living for the City by Sylvester. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman as we turn to prize-winning author Adam Cohen, who has a new piece in The Atlantic headline, Justice Breyer's Legacy-Defining Decision. It examines the growing question of whether the Supreme Court justice should step down so that he can be replaced while there's a Democratic president and a Democratic-run Senate. Justice Breyer is now 82 years old, the oldest member of the High Court. Adam Cohen is also author of Supreme Inequality, the Supreme Court's 50-year battle for a more unjust America. Adam, welcome back to Democracy Now! Why don't you lay out what this growing argument is?
Great to be here, Amy. Great to see you. Sure. As you mentioned, Justice Breyer is 82 years old, the oldest member of the court. This is a moment where if he retires, President Biden will be able to replace him. The Democrats control the Senate. They could put a much younger person in place. And President Biden has said, in fact, that he would appoint a black woman. That would be the first black woman on the Supreme Court. If Breyer does not retire now, there's a very real danger that the Democrats will lose their control of the Senate. It's a razor-thin majority right now. Literally, if something were, God forbid, to happen to Sherrod Brown or Pat Leahy or any of the Democratic senators who are from states with a Republican governor who would appoint a replacement, if anything happened to any of those senators, the Democrats would lose control of the Senate. And we know that Mitch McConnell just will not confirm any Democratic appointments to the court. So if Breyer doesn't step down now, there's a very real chance that Republicans will eventually fill that seat and maybe turn a 6-3 conservative majority, which has already been terrible, into a 7-2 conservative majority.
I want to quote from Dahlia Lithwick's piece in Slate, headlined, "Stop Telling Justice Breyer to Retire," saying, quote, "Not only is it counterproductive, but it misses the point." Lithwick argues replacing a liberal justice with another liberal justice on a 6-3 court is important, but it's also small ball. If we do or don't want justices to time their own retirements in exceedingly political ways, there's a way to fix that: implementing mandatory retirement ages or 18-year terms. Adam Cohen, your response.
Yeah, I'm a great fan of Dahlia's, and I do disagree with her on this for a couple of reasons. One is, yes, it would be great to have fundamental reform of the court along the lines that she mentions. It would be great to have term limits, to expand the court so we could get, out of this, 6-3 conservative majority, which I have to emphasize is not representative of where the American public is. It's far to the right of the general public, as we've seen in the last presidential and congressional elections. The problem is that is not going to happen. The Senate right now is so reluctant to do even mainstream Democratic things like, say, pass a good infrastructure bill. The Senate is just not going to go along with expanding the court or term limits anytime soon. So that means Democrats have to start playing the same game the Republicans have. The Republicans have been amazingly effective at the kind of small bore politics of the court that Dahlia mentions. Like in 2018, Justice Kennedy stepped down when he was 81, a year younger than Breyer, and that allowed President Trump to fill that seat. Republicans hand off their seats very effectively. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she was still on the court, there were calls from progressives for her to step down. When Obama was president, when the Democrats controlled the Senate, she did not step down, and her seat has now been filled by President Trump with Amy Coney Barrett, who could cast the deciding vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. So I agree with Dahlia that it would be great to have these big reforms, but Democrats need to play the small bore game too.
So I want to turn to one of those decisions that was just made. Yes, the Supreme Court's union-busting decision last Wednesday, in which the justices ruled 6-3 that a California labor law violates the constitutional rights of property owners by giving union organizers access to workers on privately owned farms during their work breaks. The ruling strikes down a crucial part of a landmark 1975 labor law that was the nation's first to recognize agricultural workers' rights to collective bargaining and grew out of efforts by the United Farm Workers to demand better pay and working conditions for California's agricultural workers. For more, in addition to Adam Cohen, we are joined by Camila Chavez. She is executive director of the Dolores Huerta Foundation. She's also the niece of the legendary farm worker organizer Cesar Chavez. Thanks so much for joining us. Of course, Chavez was the United Farm Workers co-founder. And now you continue the legacy with Dolores Huerta, Camila Chavez. Can you respond to this Supreme Court ruling?
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me. And I also just wanted to say that I'm also the youngest daughter of Dolores Huerta. So to your question, this ruling is a setback for unions, for workers' rights. The idea that organizers who are on property after giving notice are taking property is ridiculous and clearly a union-busting position. Farm companies said that union access allowed, quote, physical invasion of land without compensation. So we know that when it comes to workers that live on the labor camps, they are living on private property. They're then shuttled to work in company vehicles. Union organizers would have no access to these workers in this case.
And Adam Cohen, if you could expand on this and the precedent it sets for workers all over the country.
Sure. There are times that you hate to be right, but, in the book that you mentioned that I wrote, Supreme Inequality, I pointed out for the last 50 years, this court has been on a drive to expand the rights of corporations and to take away rights from workers, consumers, people of color, other disadvantaged groups. That's what this is part of, that larger picture. And what they used is a very broad expansion of the takings clause, saying that it's taking private property for California to say that union organizers have a right to go onto an employer's property to organize workers. But that's just a crazy expansion of the law. In fact, the government allows inspectors of all kinds to enter on private property, like to do food inspections, to do inspections of nursery schools. What this means effectively is that it's very hard for unions to organize folks like the farm workers, because it's hard to find them if you don't get to go to their workplace. We saw that in Alabama when Amazon had trouble reaching workers on the streets on their way to work. So this is a real blow to union organizing, and we've seen how union membership has been declining precipitously really back since World War II. A big part of that is decisions like this from the Supreme Court that really make it impossible for them to organize workers.
And Camila Chavez, back on the specifics of this, the 45-year-old California law that allowed unions to organize on private farms, what does this mean also for how it might affect workers when it comes to COVID-19 vaccinations and other treatment of farm workers?
Right. So we know that agricultural workers have experienced a higher risk of exposure throughout the pandemic due to field and packing facilities, working conditions, a lack of preventative education and PPE. They have crowded transportation to and from work sites and live in overcrowded housing conditions. There was a study by the UC Merced Labor Center that showed that workers in California industries, warehousing, agriculture, food processing, meat packing, they had a 30% increase in deaths related to COVID. So we know that, they aren't getting the information, the resources that they need. And I will say that, community-based organizations have had to step in to provide this information. And many of the organizations that we work in collaboration with are going to the fields. We are providing this information to the workers and wondering, is this going to now deny us that access of being able to, provide them, even with setting up vaccination appointments. We were the ones that were advocating that farm workers be put at the top of the list of essential workers with healthcare workers, to be prioritized for vaccination. Thank goodness Governor Newsom did listen to us. Governor Newsom also invested millions of dollars for, organizations, community-based grassroots organizations to provide this direct outreach regarding COVID.
And finally, Adam Cohen, as the Supreme Court term wraps up, what are other cases you're looking at?
Well, there's a lot of damaging stuff that's in the pipeline. The court accepted a case which could be the one that they used to overturn Roe v. Wade out of Mississippi, and there haven't been 5 votes to do that yet. There may be now. There's also a big Harvard affirmative action case in which Asian American students are challenging Harvard selection procedures. So far, 2 courts have upheld Harvard's affirmative action plan, but there's a very real chance that Chief Justice Roberts, who does not like race-based remedies of any kind, will use the Harvard case probably next year, possibly next year, to end affirmative action in even private education and maybe even more broadly. So there's a lot of damage that even a 6-3 majority is likely to do.
And expected to take up a transgender case?
Possibly. There is a transgender case that they could take up out of Virginia that could do a lot of damage there as well. So again, we're seeing what a 6-3 court can do. A 7-2 court, which would also preserve a conservative majority for many years, maybe decades, can do a lot more damage across our society.
Well, I want to thank you all so much for being with us. Adam Cohen, writer and author of Supreme Inequality, the Supreme Court's 50-year battle for a more unjust America. We'll link to your piece in The Atlantic, Justice Breyer's Legacy-Defining Decision. And I want to thank Camila Chavez, Executive Director of the Dolores Huerta Foundation, daughter of Dolores Huerta and niece of Cesar Chavez. That does it for the show. If you'd like to sign up for our daily digest, send the word democracy Democracy Now!, one word, no space. Text it to 66866. Democracy Now! To 66866. Democracy Now! Is produced with Renee Feltz, Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Maria Tarasena, Carla Wills, Tammy Warrenoff, Tarina Nadura, Sam Alkoff, Marie Astudio, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Honey Masood, and Adriana Contreras. Our general manager is Julie Crosby. Happy 5th birthday to Julie's daughter, Ava Lee. I'm Amy Goodman. Please be safe. Thanks so much for joining us.